Elena Voss checked her watch for the third time in 2 minutes, and the man across the table noticed. "Running somewhere else tonight?" Daniel Cole asked, his voice calm, almost amused. "I have a company that doesn't run itself," Elena said, not bothering to soften the edge in her tone. "So yes, in a way, I am always running somewhere else." The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place where the waiters moved like they were floating, and the candles never seemed to burn down. Elena had chosen it. She always chose places like this, places that reminded people exactly who they were sitting across from. Daniel had arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a simple gray jacket that had clearly been ironed with care but not with money. Elena had noticed that within the first 10 seconds. She noticed everything within the first 10 seconds. It was a skill that had built her company from nothing into something worth 9 figures, and it was a skill that never turned off, not even on a supposed night of rest. "So," she said, swirling the wine in her glass without drinking it, "my assistant tells me you're a teacher." "History," Daniel said. 10th grade mostly." "Interesting," Elena said, in a tone that suggested it was not interesting at all. "And you have a daughter." "Mia. She's 7. Her mother?" Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly, so slightly that most people would have missed it. Elena did not miss it. "She passed away 3 years ago," he said simply. Elena nodded, filing the information away the same way she filed away a competitor's quarterly earnings. Useful, perhaps, later. Not painful to her, because none of this touched her. "That must be difficult," she said, in the exact voice she used when a junior employee told her about a family emergency. Polite, distant, already moving on. The waiter arrived to take their order, and Elena ordered for herself, without asking Daniel what he wanted first, a habit that had annoyed every person who had ever shared a table with her, and one she had never once tried to correct. Daniel simply waited his turn and ordered something modest from the menu, the cheapest entree on the page, and Elena caught that too. "You know you can order whatever you like," she said. "I'm paying." "I know," Daniel said. "I like this one." Elena almost laughed, but she caught herself. She was not here to enjoy herself. She was here because her assistant, Priya, had begged her for 2 weeks straight, telling her that a person who worked 18 hours a day and canceled every date within 20 minutes needed to try, just once, to sit through a full dinner with a stranger. Elena had agreed only to stop the pestering, and she had already decided, before she even sat down, exactly how this evening would end. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, leaning back in her chair. "Go ahead. Why would a matchmaking service think a teacher and a CEO belong at the same table?" She said it lightly, almost like a joke, but there was nothing light about it. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, but with something closer to quiet observation, the same way he might look at a student who had just said something clever but cruel in the same breath. "Maybe they thought you needed someone who wouldn't be impressed by your title," he said. "Or maybe they made a mistake," Elena said, waving her hand slightly. "It happens. These algorithms match people by hobbies and habits, not by actual compatibility. I run a technology company with 4,000 employees. I sit on 2 boards. I haven't taken a vacation in 6 years. You grade essays and pick your daughter up from school at 3:15. There's nothing wrong with that life. It's just not remotely close to mine." She expected him to look hurt, or defensive, or maybe even angry enough to leave. Instead, Daniel simply smiled, the kind of smile a person gives when they've heard worse and survived it. "You're right," he said. "It's not close to yours. But you asked to know, so I told you the truth. Mia is my whole world. If loving her and building a stable, quiet life for her makes me less interesting to you, that's all right. I didn't come here to be interesting. I came here because my sister insisted, the same way your assistant probably insisted for you." For a moment, something flickered across Elena's face, something almost like respect, but she pushed it down immediately. She did not like being handled, she did not like being seen through, and more than anything, she did not like the small, uncomfortable feeling creeping into her chest that told her she had been unkind for no reason at all. "Well," she said, reaching for her wine again, "at least we agree on something. Neither of us wanted to be here." The waiter returned with the first course, and for a few minutes, silence settled between them. the kind of silence that feels heavier the longer it stretches. Elena used the pause to glance at her phone under the table, a habit she had never bothered breaking for anyone. There was a message from her chief financial officer, marked urgent, but she swiped it away. Nothing that could not wait an hour. "Tell me about your company," Daniel said, breaking the silence. Since apparently that's the more interesting subject. Elena almost smiled at the dry note in his voice, but she launched into her usual explanation anyway, the same one she gave investors and journalists, filled with numbers and growth percentages and the names of markets she had expanded into. Daniel listened without interrupting, nodding at the right moments, asking one or two sharp questions that surprised her with how well they landed. "You understand business," she said, slightly surprised. "I understand people," Daniel said. "Business is just people with spreadsheets." Elena studied him for a second, unsure whether to be annoyed or intrigued. She settled on annoyed, because it was easier, and because admitting the second option meant admitting she might have been wrong about him within the first 5 minutes of sitting down. "So what's your grand plan then?" she asked. "Teach history forever? Retire on a pension that barely covers rent in this city?" "Something like that," Daniel said, unbothered. "I don't need much. I need Mia to feel safe. I need enough time to help with homework and make dinner and read to her before bed. Everything else is extra." "That sounds small," Elena said. "It sounds like enough," Daniel replied. "Not everyone needs an empire, Elena." The way he said her name, calm and unafraid, caught her off guard. Most people said her name like it was a title, careful and measured. Daniel said it like she was simply a person sitting across from him, someone who happened to be difficult company for the evening. The second course arrived, and Elena found herself, almost without meaning to, asking another question, then another, the mocking edge in her voice softening by the smallest degree each time. She learned that Mia loved dinosaurs more than princesses, that Daniel coached a weekend soccer team made up mostly of kids who had nowhere else to go on Saturdays, that he had once turned down a corporate job with better pay because it would have meant missing every single school pickup. None of it changed her mind about the mismatch between them. If anything, it confirmed it. But somewhere beneath the confirmation, a small, stubborn thought had begun to take root, one she refused to look at directly. Then her phone buzzed again, this time 3 times in quick succession, and this time Elena picked it up without hiding it. Her expression changed the moment she read the screen. The confident, bored posture dropped away, replaced by something tighter, more alert. She scanned the message twice, her thumb hovering over the screen, as her mind raced through numbers and names and consequences she had spent years learning to calculate in seconds. "Everything all right?" Daniel asked. "No," Elena said quietly, more to herself than to him. "No, it's really not." She set the phone down on the table, her hand trembling just slightly, and for the first time all evening, she looked genuinely rattled. The confident CEO who had spent the last hour dismissing the man across from her suddenly looked, for just a moment, like someone who had no idea what to do next. And Daniel, watching her carefully, did not smile, did not gloat, did not remind her of anything she had said earlier that evening. He simply leaned forward slightly and asked the one question that would change everything that followed. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Elena's fingers hovered over the phone as she read the message a third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. They did not. The deal her company had spent 8 months negotiating, the one that would have doubled their market presence across 3 countries, was collapsing in real time, and nobody on her team could explain why. "It's a contract," she said finally, her voice tight. "A deal I've been building since January. My legal team just told me the other side pulled out an hour ago without any warning. No explanation. No counteroffer, just gone." "Which company?" Daniel asked. Elena hesitated. It was not her habit to discuss confidential business matters with strangers, let alone a stranger she had spent the last hour dismissing. But the panic bubbling under her composed exterior made her answer before she could stop herself. "Halden Corporate Solutions," she said. "We were merging our logistics platform with their distribution network. It would have made both companies stronger. Now it's falling apart, and I don't understand why." Daniel went very still. For a moment, Elena thought she had said something wrong, that perhaps she had overshared with a man she barely knew, a man she had spent the evening treating like an afterthought. But then he spoke, and his voice had changed, no longer soft and easygoing, but careful and precise. "My brother works there," he said. "Owen. He's been there for 6 years, mid-level operations." Elena blinked. "That's a coincidence." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe not. Owen called me 2 days ago, upset about something happening at his company. He didn't give me details, he's careful about that kind of thing, but he mentioned a merger falling apart because someone on their executive board panicked over a rumor. Something about your company's numbers being inflated. He said it like it was common knowledge inside the building." Elena's stomach dropped. "Inflated numbers? That's absurd. Our financials are audited quarterly. There's nothing inflated about anything we report." "I believe you," Daniel said. "But if that's the rumor circulating on their end, it doesn't matter whether it's true. If their board believes it, they'll pull out to protect themselves, and they won't tell you why, because admitting the real reason would mean admitting they acted on a rumor instead of facts." Elena stared at him, the pieces beginning to click together in her mind faster than she wanted to admit. She had spent the last 3 hours since receiving the first warning email trying to guess at motives, assuming competitors had leaked something, assuming her own team had made a mistake somewhere. Not once had anyone mentioned a rumor about inflated numbers. "Where would a rumor like that even start?" she asked, mostly to herself. "I don't know," Daniel said. "But if I were you, I'd call whoever handles your public communications right now, before this becomes something bigger than a private matter. Rumors that make boards nervous enough to walk away from an 8-month negotiation don't usually stay contained for long." Elena's hands moved automatically, pulling up her phone and typing a message to her chief communications officer, even as her mind continued turning over what Daniel had said. She had built her entire company on the principle of controlling information before it controlled her, and here she was, sitting in a restaurant with a man she had spent an hour looking down on, receiving the first real piece of useful information she had gotten all evening. "You said panicked," Elena said slowly, looking up from her phone. "Not concerned. Panicked. Why would a rumor about numbers cause panic instead of just concern?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "Because Owen mentioned something else. He said there was talk that the rumor came with proof, documents. He didn't see them himself, but people were saying screenshots were circulating internally, something that looked like it came from inside your company." The color drained slightly from Elena's face. "That's not a rumor," she said quietly. "That's a leak." "Maybe," Daniel said. Elena's mind raced through the list of people who had access to her company's internal financial documents. It was a short list, deliberately kept short for exactly this reason, but a short list still meant several names, several faces she had trusted for years. "I need to make a call," she said, standing abruptly. "Of course," Daniel said, unbothered by the sudden shift in the evening. "Take your time." Elena stepped away from the table, phone pressed to her ear, and Daniel watched her go, his expression unreadable. He did not smile at having been useful. He did not seem to feel any particular satisfaction at having offered information that might save the very deal Elena had spent the evening treating as more important than the man sitting across from her. He simply waited, patient, the same patience he likely used every day with a room full of teenagers who did not always want to listen. When Elena returned to the table 12 minutes later, her expression had shifted again, no longer panicked but focused, sharp, the look of someone building a plan piece by piece. "My communications officer confirmed it," she said, sitting down slowly. "There are documents circulating, internal ones, financial projections that were never meant to leave the building, altered slightly to make our growth numbers look inflated. Someone doctored real documents and leaked them to make it look like fraud." "Do you know who?" Daniel asked. "Not yet," Elena said, "but I have a very short list of people who had access to those exact files, and I intend to find out tonight, not tomorrow." She looked at Daniel then, really looked at him, in a way she had not managed to do for the entire first hour of their date. The mocking edge that had colored every word she said to him earlier had disappeared entirely, replaced by something more careful, more curious. "How did you know all of that?" she asked. "About the rumor, about the panic, About the documents. Your brother works there. Fine. But most people wouldn't have connected pieces like that so quickly. Daniel shrugged, the gesture modest, almost embarrassed. I spend my days teaching teenagers how to spot bias in historical documents, how rumors turn into accepted facts if nobody questions them early enough. It's not that different from what just happened to your deal. Someone created a story, attached something that looked official to it, and let panic do the rest of the work. Elena sat back in her chair, studying him with an expression that had changed completely from the one she wore at the start of the evening. Gone was the dismissive tilt of her head, the bored disinterest in her eyes. In its place was something closer to genuine attention, the kind she usually reserved only for people she considered equals in a boardroom. I owe you an apology, she said finally. For what? For spending the last hour treating you like you had nothing to offer this conversation, Elena said. I judged you before you even sat down. I decided who you were, based on your job title, and made assumptions about what that meant for your intelligence, your ambition, your value. I was wrong. Daniel considered her words carefully before responding. You weren't entirely wrong, he said. I don't have your title, your company, or your bank account. But you're right that it doesn't mean I have nothing to offer. Everyone has something to offer, if you're willing to actually look. Elena nodded slowly, the words settling into her chest with more weight than she expected. She had spent years surrounding herself with people who mirrored her ambitions, who spoke her language of growth percentages and market share, and somewhere along the way she had convinced herself that anyone outside that world simply did not belong at her table. Can I ask you something else? She said. Go ahead. Why didn't you defend yourself earlier, when I made those comments about your job, about Mia, about all of it? Most people would have pushed back, or left, or at least looked upset. You just sat there and took it. Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully, because getting upset wouldn't have changed your mind. He said, people who judge quickly usually need to see something for themselves before they reconsider. I figured either the evening would end and we'd never see each other again, in which case it wouldn't matter, or something would happen that showed you a different side of things. I didn't expect it to be quite like this, but here we are. Elena let out a short laugh, the first genuine one of the evening. That's either very wise or very strange. Probably both, Daniel said, and for the first time Elena smiled back at him without any trace of mockery in it. The rest of the second course arrived, and the conversation that followed felt entirely different from the one before it. Elena asked questions and actually listened to the answers. She asked about Mia again, this time with real curiosity, wanting to know about the dinosaur facts the 7-year-old rattled off at dinner, about the drawings that covered the refrigerator at home, about the quiet nights after a hard day at work, when Daniel sat beside her bed just to make sure she felt safe. She learned that Daniel's wife, Grace, had passed away suddenly, an illness that gave them only a few months of warning, and that Daniel had spent that time learning everything he could about raising a daughter alone, about braiding hair and packing lunches, and answering questions about loss that no parenting book fully prepared him for. That must have been the hardest thing you've ever done, Elena said quietly. It was, Daniel admitted, but it taught me what actually matters. Before Grace passed, I had a corporate job, decent salary, long hours. After, I couldn't do it anymore. Mia needed a father who was present, not one who was building someone else's company 60 hours a week. So I became a teacher. Less money, but I'm home for dinner every night. I'm at every school play. I never miss anything important anymore. Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning his words over in her mind. She thought of her own life, the 6 years without a real vacation, the relationships that had ended because she was always somewhere else, the family dinners she had missed because a deal always felt more urgent than the people waiting at home. I don't think I know what that feels like, she admitted. Being present, really present, I mean, not just physically in the room while my mind is somewhere else. It's a skill, Daniel said gently. Like anything else, it just requires deciding that something matters more than being available for everything else. The rest of dinner passed in a way Elena had not expected when she arrived. The urgency of the crisis at her company had not disappeared, but it no longer consumed every thought in her mind. For the first time in longer than she could remember, She found herself genuinely enjoying a conversation that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or competitive positioning. When the check arrived, Elena reached for it automatically, the same way she always did, assuming control of every situation without thinking twice. Daniel placed his hand lightly over hers, not to stop her, but to pause the moment. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "And thank you for actually talking to me during the second half of it." Elena looked at him, and for the first time all evening, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel around anyone, a small, quiet flicker of humility. "Thank you for not walking out when I gave you every reason to," she said. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool, and neither of them moved quickly toward their separate cars. Elena's phone buzzed again, her communications officer requesting an urgent call, and she glanced at Daniel with something like reluctance. "I have to go handle this," she said. "The deal, the leak, all of it." "I understand," Daniel said. "Family emergencies come in different shapes. Yours just happens to wear a business suit." Elena almost laughed again, surprised at how easily he found the humor in a night that had swung so wildly between disaster and discovery. She hesitated at her car door, phone still buzzing in her hand, and turned back to him one last time. "Would it be strange," she asked carefully, "if I wanted to see you again, after everything I said tonight?" Daniel considered the question with the same calm thoughtfulness he had shown all evening. "Not strange," he said. "Honest. That's usually a good place to start." Elena nodded, something settling in her chest that felt unfamiliar and, strangely, welcome. She got into her car, already dialing her communications officer, already shifting back into the sharp, focused CEO the world expected her to be. But as she pulled away from the curb, she found herself glancing once more in the rearview mirror, watching Daniel walk calmly toward his own car, unaware of just how much one evening had already begun to change. By the time Elena reached her office building, it was nearly midnight, and the lobby lights had been dimmed to their overnight setting, casting long shadows across the marble floor. She did not notice the shadows. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through the short list of people who had access to the financial projections that were now circulating outside her company walls. Her chief communications officer, a sharp and steady woman named Priya, was waiting for her at the elevator, tablet in hand, expression grim. "I pulled the access logs," Priya said, falling into step beside Elena as they walked toward the executive floor. Only 6 people had access to that specific file in the last month. 5 of them checked out clean. Timestamps matched their regular work patterns, nothing unusual. "And the 6th?" Elena asked. "Victor Hale," Priya said, "head of strategic partnerships. He downloaded the file at 2 in the morning 11 days ago, from an external network, not the office." Elena stopped walking. Victor had been with the company for 4 years, one of the people she had trusted enough to bring into strategic conversations most employees never saw. He had championed the Halden merger from the beginning, had spent months building relationships with their executive team, had seemed, in every way, invested in its success. "Why would he sabotage a deal he helped build?" Elena asked, more to herself than to Priya. "I don't know," Priya said. "But there's something else. Halden's board received an anonymous message 2 days ago, before the documents even started circulating, warning them that your company's numbers couldn't be trusted. The message came from an account that traces back to a personal device, not company property, registered under a name that isn't Victor's, but the metadata puts it in the same building his apartment complex sits in." Elena's jaw tightened. "Get him in here. Tonight, if he'll come. Tomorrow morning at the latest." "He's already on his way," Priya said. "I called him 20 minutes ago and told him there was an emergency board matter requiring his input. He doesn't know we suspect him yet." Elena nodded, appreciating the foresight even as her stomach twisted with the particular kind of betrayal that only comes from someone close enough to have earned trust. She thought of Daniel's words from earlier that evening, about rumors turning into accepted facts when nobody questioned them early enough, and wondered what Victor had hoped to gain by planting doubt where none had existed before. Victor arrived 20 minutes later, his tie slightly loosened, his expression carefully neutral in the way people practice when they know they might be walking into trouble. Elena met him in the small conference room on the top floor, Priya seated beside her, A folder of evidence closed on the table between them. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Elena said, her voice level, giving nothing away yet. "Of course," Victor said, sitting down across from her. "Priya said this was urgent. Is it about Halden?" "It is," Elena said. "The deal collapsed tonight. Their board pulled out over concerns that our financial numbers were inflated." Victor's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something Elena had learned to recognize over years of negotiating with people who thought they could hide their reactions. "That's absurd," he said. "Our numbers are audited. There's no basis for that claim." "I agree," Elena said, "which is why I find it strange that documents appearing to prove otherwise are currently circulating inside their offices. Documents pulled from a file only 6 people had access to, one of whom accessed it at 2 in the morning from a personal device." The room went very quiet. Victor's carefully neutral expression cracked, just slightly, at the edges. "I can explain," he said. "I'm listening," Elena said. Victor took a long breath before speaking, and when he did, his voice had lost its earlier composure. "I found out 3 weeks ago that once the merger closed, my division was being restructured. Not eliminated, restructured, but restructured in a way that would have moved my role under someone else's authority. Someone younger, someone who joined the company 2 years after me. So you sabotaged an 8-month negotiation to protect your position," Elena said flatly. "I panicked," Victor admitted. "I told myself I was just slowing things down, buying time to find another position before the changes took effect. I never meant for it to blow up into something this large. I only sent one message to a contact at Halden. Someone I trusted would keep it private. I don't know how it turned into documents circulating through their entire office." Elena studied him for a long moment, feeling the particular exhaustion that comes from discovering betrayal in someone she had genuinely respected. "You didn't just slow things down, Victor. You destroyed a deal that would have protected hundreds of jobs, including some in your own division. You did it to protect yourself, and in doing so, you put everyone else's future at risk." Victor said nothing, his eyes fixed on the table between them. "I want everything," Elena continued. "Every message, every document, every contact you used at Halden. I want it tonight, and I want you gone from this building by morning. Legal will be in touch about the rest." Victor nodded slowly, defeated, and Priya escorted him out to collect what was needed, leaving Elena alone in the quiet conference room. She sat for a long moment, staring at the closed folder in front of her, thinking not about the deal, not about the damage to her company's reputation, but about the strange series of events that had led her to this exact moment. If she had not gone on that date, if Daniel had not mentioned his brother, if she had continued dismissing him the way she had planned to for the entire evening, she might have spent days chasing the wrong theories, assuming a competitor had leaked information, never once suspecting Victor until the damage had grown far larger than it already was. She pulled out her phone and typed a message before she could second-guess herself. "You were right. Found the source of the leak tonight. Someone inside my own company. I don't think I would have caught it this quickly without what you told me." The reply came faster than she expected. "Glad it helped. How bad is the damage?" "Bad, but contained. I'm heading home now. Thank you again for everything tonight." "Anytime," Daniel wrote back. "Get some rest. Mia has soccer practice in the morning, so I understand needing sleep more than most people right now." Elena smiled at her phone, an expression that felt unfamiliar on her face this late into a night that had started with mockery and ended with something entirely different. She set the phone down and called her communications team back in, spending the next 2 hours drafting a statement to send to Halden's board, explaining the situation, providing evidence of the internal sabotage, and requesting a chance to resume negotiations once trust had been restored. By the time she finally left the office, the sky had begun to lighten at the edges, the first hints of morning creeping over the city skyline. She sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine, replaying the entire evening in her mind, from the moment she had walked into that restaurant fully intending to get through dinner as quickly as possible, to the moment she had found herself genuinely grateful for a man she had spent an hour treating like he had nothing to offer. The following days moved quickly. Halden's board, presented with clear evidence that the leak had originated from inside Elena's own company, rather than any wrongdoing on her part, agreed to resume discussions, though with understandably renewed caution. Elena spent the week rebuilding trust piece by piece, meeting personally with their executives, answering every question with total transparency, determined to prove that her company's integrity had never actually been in question. Victor's departure sent ripples through the office, employees whispering about what had happened, though Elena kept the full details private, unwilling to turn an internal matter into public spectacle. She restructured his division herself, promoting from within, careful to avoid repeating the same mistake of assuming loyalty where none had actually been tested. Through all of it, she found herself thinking of Daniel more than she expected to. Not just the information he had offered that first night, but the calm, steady way he had handled every moment of an evening that had started so poorly. She thought about the apology she owed him, the one she had begun that night but had not fully finished, and she found herself wanting to see him again, not out of obligation or curiosity about his usefulness, but because something about their conversation had stayed with her, in a way few things did. On the 5th day after their date, once the Halden deal had been formally resurrected and signed with renewed terms, Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She sat at her desk that evening, the office quieter than usual, and pulled out her phone. "Dinner again?" she typed. "This time I promise to actually listen from the start." She stared at the message for a long moment before sending it, feeling a flicker of nervousness that surprised her. She could not remember the last time sending a simple message had made her hands feel unsteady. The reply came within minutes. "Mia wants to meet you. She heard I had dinner with someone and hasn't stopped asking questions since. Would Sunday work?" Something simple, nothing fancy. She likes pizza more than anything a restaurant with candles could offer. Elena read the message twice, something warm settling in her chest at the thought of meeting the little girl who loved dinosaurs and had covered her father's refrigerator in drawings. It was a far cry from the corporate dinners and formal galas that filled most of her calendar, and strangely, she found herself looking forward to it more than she had looked forward to anything in longer than she could remember. "Sunday works perfectly," she wrote back. "Tell her I like pizza too, and I promise not to talk about spreadsheets the entire time." "She'll hold you to that," Daniel replied. "She's very serious about pizza etiquette." Elena set her phone down, a small smile lingering on her face, as she looked out over the city lights beyond her office window. The deal was saved, Victor was gone, and somewhere across the city, a little girl named Mia was already planning what topping to request on a pizza she would share with a stranger who, until 5 days ago, Elena had planned to dismiss entirely. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena Voss found herself looking forward to something that had nothing to do with numbers, markets, or the relentless climb she had spent her entire adult life pursuing. She found herself looking forward to Sunday. Sunday arrived faster than Elena expected, and she found herself standing outside a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, holding a small gift bag she had debated buying for nearly an hour before settling on a children's book about dinosaurs, the kind with detailed illustrations she hoped a 7-year-old with strong opinions would approve of. The door opened before she could knock, and a small girl with dark curly hair and an unmistakable gap-toothed smile stood in the doorway, studying Elena with the intense curiosity only children seem capable of. "Are you the CEO?" Mia asked immediately. "I am," Elena said, crouching slightly to be at eye level. "Are you the dinosaur expert?" Mia's face lit up instantly. "I know 42 dinosaurs. Do you know any?" "Just 3, Elena admitted. Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, and Stegosaurus." Mia looked unimpressed but not entirely disappointed. "That's okay. I can teach you more. Dad says teaching people things makes you smarter too." Daniel appeared behind his daughter, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel, an easy smile on his face that looked far more relaxed than the one he had worn during their first dinner together. "Mia, let her inside before you start the quiz." Elena stepped into the small house, taking in the warm, lived-in feeling of the space, framed drawings covering nearly every wall, a comfortable couch with a blanket tossed over one arm, the smell of pizza dough baking somewhere in the kitchen. It was nothing like her own apartment, which she used mostly for sleeping between long days at the office, sparse and quiet, and lacking any real trace of a life being lived within it. "This is different from what I expected," Elena admitted, following Daniel toward the kitchen, while Mia raced ahead of them both. "Different good or different bad?" Daniel asked. "Different good," Elena said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. It feels like people actually live here. That's the goal, Daniel said, pulling a homemade pizza from the oven, the crust slightly uneven, but golden and fragrant. Mia insisted on helping make dinner tonight. She's very particular about pepperoni placement. Every piece has to have exactly the same amount, Mia said seriously, climbing onto a kitchen chair. Otherwise it's not fair. Elena laughed, a genuine sound that felt lighter than any laugh she could remember producing in recent memory. That's a very reasonable rule. Dinner passed easily, Mia peppering Elena with questions about her company, about whether she had ever seen a real fossil, about what it felt like to be in charge of thousands of people. Elena answered each question carefully, adjusting her usual polished responses into something simpler, something a 7-year-old could actually follow, and found herself enjoying the exercise far more than she expected. After dinner, while Mia disappeared to her room to retrieve a drawing she insisted on showing Elena, Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. "She likes you," he said. "That's not something that happens easily. She's usually cautious around new people." "I like her too," Elena said honestly. "She's sharp. Reminds me a little of myself at that age, if I'm honest, though I doubt I was ever this charming about it." "You were charming tonight too," Daniel said, "different from the woman I met at that restaurant." Elena felt a small flicker of embarrassment at the reminder. "I've been meaning to properly apologize for that. I said terrible things that night, about your job, about your life. I judged you before I even gave you a chance, and I've regretted it since." "You already apologized," Daniel said gently. "That same night, actually, once you realized I wasn't just background noise to your evening." "I know," Elena said, "but I don't think I said it well enough. You handled everything I threw at you with more patience than I deserved, and then you turned around and saved my company from a crisis I might not have understood in time without you. I spent an entire career building a reputation for reading people quickly and accurately, and I completely misjudged you within the first 10 seconds of sitting down." Daniel considered her words for a long moment before responding. "People misjudge me all the time," he said. "I don't have the kind of life that impresses most people at first glance. No corner office, no assistant, no company with my name attached to it. Just a classroom full of teenagers and a little girl who thinks pepperoni placement is a matter of justice." "That's not nothing," Elena said. "That's actually more than most people manage to build in a lifetime." Mia returned at that moment, waving a drawing of what appeared to be a colorful dinosaur wearing a business suit, and the conversation shifted back to lighter territory, Elena examining the drawing with genuine appreciation, while Mia explained, in great detail, why she had decided the dinosaur needed a briefcase. The evening ended with Elena reluctantly checking her watch, aware that Mia's bedtime was approaching, and not wanting to overstay her welcome on what had been, by any measure, a wonderful first visit. Daniel walked her to the door, while Mia waved enthusiastically from the couch, already asking when Elena would visit again. "Thank you for tonight," Elena said at the doorway. "I don't think I've had an evening like this in years." "You're welcome anytime," Daniel said. "Mia would probably insist on it, honestly. She's already planning your next dinosaur lesson." Elena smiled, feeling something warm and unfamiliar settle over her as she walked to her car. The following weeks brought more evenings like that one, quiet dinners at Daniel's house, weekend visits to the park where Mia insisted on being pushed impossibly high on the swings, slow conversations on his porch after Mia had gone to bed, conversations that stretched later into the night than either of them intended. Elena found herself changing in small, quiet ways that she barely noticed until they had already taken root. She began leaving the office earlier, delegating tasks she once insisted on handling personally, trusting her team in ways she had never allowed herself to before. She started answering emails during business hours instead of at midnight, protecting her evenings the way Daniel protected his for Mia. Not everyone in her professional circle understood the change. Her longtime friend and board member, Nadia Farrow, cornered her after a quarterly meeting one afternoon, concern etched across her face. "You're different lately," Nadia said. "Distracted. You left the Hendricks call 20 minutes early yesterday." "I had somewhere to be," Elena said simply. "You never have somewhere to be," Nadia said. That's kind of the whole point of you, Elena. You're the person who's always available, always working, always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. What's changed? Elena considered how much to share, aware that her personal life had always remained carefully separate from her professional one. I met someone, she said finally. A good person. And his daughter, who is somehow even better. Nadia's expression shifted from concern to something closer to surprised curiosity. That's the first personal thing you've told me in 3 years of working together. I know, Elena said. It surprised me too. Is it serious? Nadia asked. Elena thought about the question longer than she expected to need. She thought about Mia's drawings covering the refrigerator, about Daniel's steady, unwavering calm even in the face of her earlier cruelty, about the quiet, simple house that felt more like a home than her own sparse apartment ever had. I think it might be, she admitted. I think it might be the most serious thing in my life right now, actually, more than any deal or any board meeting. Nadia studied her for a long moment, something like relief crossing her face. Good, she said. You've needed something like that for a long time, whether you wanted to admit it or not. Just don't let the board scare you out of it. They'll notice the change eventually, and some of them won't like it. Elena nodded, aware that Nadia's warning carried more weight than a casual comment. Her company's investors valued predictability above almost everything else, and a CEO who suddenly began prioritizing personal time over relentless availability might raise concerns among people who had grown comfortable with her constant presence. She was not wrong to worry. 2 weeks later, during a routine board meeting, one of the more conservative investors, a sharp-featured man named Gordon Whitfield, raised the topic directly, his tone carefully polite, but pointed enough to make his concern clear. There's been talk, Gordon said, about a shift in your availability lately. Leaving earlier, delegating more than usual. Should the board be concerned about your commitment to the company? Elena felt the old instinct rise in her, the urge to defend herself immediately, to prove her dedication through numbers and results the way she always had. But something had shifted in her over the past weeks, something steadier and more grounded than the anxious need to prove herself at every turn. I've spent 6 years without taking a single full day off, Elena said calmly. During that time, I built this company from a struggling startup into one of the strongest players in our industry. I don't think anyone in this room can question my commitment based on the results alone. No one is questioning the results, Gordon said carefully. Then trust that a leader who protects a few hours of her evening isn't suddenly less capable of leading, Elena said. If anything, I've made clearer decisions in the last few weeks than I have in years, precisely because I'm not running on empty every single day. Ask my team, ask Priya. The company hasn't slowed down. If anything, it's running more smoothly than it has in a long time. The room fell quiet for a moment, and Gordon, though clearly not entirely convinced, nodded slowly, allowing the topic to drop for the time being. Elena left the meeting feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and pride, aware that she had just defended a version of her life she had never expected to need defending. A life that included pizza nights and dinosaur drawings and a little girl who was slowly, steadily, teaching her what it meant to be present. That evening she drove straight to Daniel's house without calling ahead, something she rarely did, preferring the predictability of scheduled plans over spontaneous visits. Daniel opened the door with mild surprise, Mia already asleep for the night, the house quiet around him. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting the tired but thoughtful expression on Elena's face. "I just defended you to my entire board," Elena said, stepping inside. "Not you specifically, but the choice to have a life outside the office. It's the first time in years I've had to explain why I deserve a few hours of peace, and somehow it felt more important than any deal I've ever closed." Daniel studied her for a long moment before pulling her into a gentle embrace, the kind of quiet, steady comfort he seemed to offer without effort. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you made the right choice." "I think so too," Elena said quietly, allowing herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to simply stand still and feel present in a moment that had nothing to do with numbers, growth percentages, or the relentless climb that had once defined every hour of her life. 6 months passed, and the quiet rhythm Elena had built with Daniel and Mia had settled into something steady enough that she could no longer imagine her life without it. Sunday pizza nights had become a fixed tradition, along with weekday dinners whenever her schedule allowed, and somewhere along the way, Elena had started keeping a drawer at Daniel's house, a small collection of clothes and toiletries that made the space feel less like a place she visited and more like a place she belonged. Her company had not slowed down, exactly the opposite. The renewed Halden merger closed successfully, expanding her company's reach across 3 new markets, and the careful, steady leadership Elena had shown throughout the crisis earned her more respect from the board than her relentless hours ever had. Gordon Whitfield, once her most vocal critic, had become, somewhat unexpectedly, one of her strongest supporters, impressed by how efficiently she now delegated and how sharp her decision-making had become since she stopped running herself into exhaustion. But not everything about balancing 2 worlds proved easy. A business magazine, preparing a profile piece on Elena's leadership following the successful merger, had done more digging than she expected, uncovering details about her personal life that she had kept carefully private throughout her career. "They know about Daniel," Priya said one morning, sliding a printed draft of the article across Elena's desk. "And about Mia. The piece frames it as a human interest angle, the powerful CEO who found unexpected happiness with a schoolteacher and his daughter. It's not unkind, but it's out there now, whether you wanted it or not." Elena read through the draft carefully, her stomach tightening at certain phrases, the article painting her relationship in broad, sensational strokes that stripped away the nuance of everything she and Daniel had actually built together. It described Daniel primarily by his modest income and his simple life, framing the relationship as a kind of charitable rescue, rather than the genuine partnership it had become. "This isn't right," Elena said, setting the pages down. "This makes it sound like I'm doing him some kind of favor, like our relationship is a headline instead of something real." "Do you want legal to push back on it before publication?" Priya asked. Elena considered the question, then shook her head slowly. "No, I think I need to handle this myself." That evening, she called the journalist directly, something she rarely did, preferring to let her communications team manage press relationships on her behalf. The journalist, a woman named Charlotte Briggs, answered with mild surprise at hearing from Elena personally. "I read your draft," Elena said, without preamble. "I'd like to offer some corrections, if you're willing to hear them." "I'm listening," Charlotte said. "You wrote that I found happiness despite Daniel's modest circumstances," Elena said. "That framing is wrong. I found happiness because of the values he brought into my life, not despite anything about his circumstances. He taught me more about presence, patience, and what actually matters in a life than any executive I've ever worked alongside. If you're going to write about this, write it accurately. Write about a man who left a higher-paying career to be present for his daughter after losing his wife, who showed remarkable patience with a woman who mocked him during their first meeting, and who ended up changing the way I lead my entire company. That's the real story, if you want one worth telling." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Charlotte spoke again, her tone noticeably softer. "That's a very different story than the one I had drafted." "It's the true one," Elena said simply. Charlotte revised the piece before publication, and when it finally ran, it told a far more accurate story, one that framed Daniel not as a modest footnote to Elena's success, but as an equal partner whose steadiness had reshaped her entire approach to leadership. The response to the article surprised Elena, readers responding not with the usual cynicism reserved for stories about wealthy executives, but with genuine warmth, many commenting on how rare it was to see someone with Elena's position speak so plainly about the value of a life built around presence rather than status. Daniel read the article the night it published, sitting across from Elena at his kitchen table while Mia slept upstairs. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, setting his phone down. "Correct the story, I mean. You could have let it run and moved on." "I couldn't," Elena said. "Not after everything you've given me. You deserve to be seen accurately, not reduced to a simple narrative because it's easier for people to understand." Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "You've changed a lot since that first dinner," he said. "The woman who sat across from me that night wouldn't have bothered correcting a magazine article for anyone." "That woman didn't know what she was missing," Elena said. "It took an entire company crisis and a very patient teacher to show her." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that no longer felt uncertain or forced, but settled and easy. the kind built slowly over months of shared dinners and honest conversations. Elena thought back to that first evening, the mockery she had carried into the restaurant, the assumptions she had made before Daniel had even finished sitting down, and marveled at how far removed she felt from that version of herself now. A few weeks later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Daniel took Elena and Mia to a small park near his house. One Mia insisted had the best dinosaur-themed playground equipment in the entire city. While Mia climbed across a wooden structure shaped loosely like a stegosaurus, Daniel sat beside Elena on a nearby bench, watching his daughter with the same quiet attentiveness he brought to everything in his life. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said, not looking away from Mia. "Of course," Elena said. "When Grace passed, I thought I'd never build a life like this again," he said. "Not just romantically, but any kind of life that felt full instead of just managed. For a long time, it was just survival, getting Mia through each day, keeping us both steady. I never expected someone like you to walk into that." "Someone who mocked you for the first hour of dinner?" Elena asked, a small, self-deprecating smile tugging at her lips. "Someone who was brave enough to change after that first hour," Daniel corrected gently. "Most people don't manage that. Most people double down on who they already are, especially people as successful as you. You didn't. You looked at yourself honestly and decided to become someone different, someone better. That's rare, Elena. Rarer than any deal you've ever closed." Elena felt her chest tighten with something warm and overwhelming, watching Mia wave excitedly from the top of the playground structure, watching Daniel's steady, calm expression as he watched his daughter with unwavering love. She thought about her old apartment, sparse and quiet, about the 18-hour days that had once defined her entire existence, about how empty success had felt before she understood what it meant to actually be present for the people who mattered. "I think you saved more than my company that night," she said quietly. "I think you saved me from becoming someone I never actually wanted to be." Daniel turned to look at her then, his expression soft, unguarded. "I think we saved each other," he said. "I needed someone to remind me that it was safe to open my life up again. You needed someone to remind you that success means nothing without people to share it with. Maybe that matchmaking service wasn't as wrong as you thought that first night." Elena laughed, the sound light and genuine, carrying easily across the quiet park. "Maybe not," she admitted, "though I still think they should have warned me how thoroughly you'd change my entire perspective on life within a single dinner." "Where's the fun in that?" Daniel said, smiling. Mia came running back toward them a moment later, breathless and excited, insisting they all needed ice cream immediately, a request neither adult found any reason to refuse. As they walked together toward the small cart parked near the park entrance, Mia's small hand slipping naturally into Elena's, Elena felt something settle inside her that she had been chasing, unknowingly, for years, without ever finding it in boardrooms or balance sheets or endless nights of relentless work. She had built an empire from nothing, expanded it across countries, weathered crises that would have broken lesser leaders. But none of that had ever felt quite like this simple, quiet Saturday, walking hand in hand with a little girl who loved dinosaurs, and a man whose steady patience had shown her, without ever raising his voice, exactly what she had been missing all along. Later that evening, once Mia had fallen asleep and the house had grown quiet around them, Elena stood on Daniel's porch, looking out at the calm suburban street, and realized, with a clarity she had rarely felt about anything in her life, that this modest house, this steady man, and his remarkable daughter had become the truest measure of success she had ever known. The mocking words she had spoken that first night at dinner felt like they belonged to an entirely different person now, someone Elena barely recognized when she looked back. In their place stood a woman who had learned, through one unexpected evening and everything that followed, that the things worth building were rarely the ones that made headlines, and the people worth knowing were rarely the ones who impressed you within the first 10 seconds. Sometimes, she thought, standing quietly under the porch light with Daniel's hand resting gently in hers, the most important lessons arrive disguised as mistakes, waiting patiently for someone humble enough to recognize them for what they truly are.